Hello, physics. Today we have a guest speaker, former Pratt High graduate. I guess she's still a Pratt High graduate. It's not former. We didn't excommunicate her or anything. But Pratt High graduate, Shrack. She has since gone on to be a captain of a ship. And although she doesn't have to talk about physics, but she's welcome to, I just wanted to tell us a little bit about her journey into her current job and how she keeps her ship floating. So a somewhat respectful clap and welcome for Shrack, please.
Well, thank you. What Mr. Sharp doesn't know is I'm extremely bored right now because I don't have a job. So I made a whole itinerary. We're going to talk about the physics, and I have some pictures and then just fun stories too. So thanks for the introduction. So Mr. Sharp sent me the links to what you guys have been studying this week about buoyancy and about density, and both of those are super important when you take a boat out in the Gulf of Alaska. You definitely want that boat to continue to float. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that and cover a couple of the things that I know you guys have already looked into, but at least this way it's a little more realistic when it's my job. So first off, I'm going to see if I can share pictures. I'm new to Zoom, so bear with me. Let's see. All right, can you guys see this picture?
Yes.
All right, first step done. So these are the boats that I work on in Alaska. You can see the big boats towards the left of the screen, the Kenai Fjord boats. We have a fleet of 9 boats, very large, very heavy boats. I have another picture with me in the frame. So you can see this is when we pull the boats out. We have to do yearly inspections of the bottom. So this is when they're in dry dock, and you can see exactly how big they are when you compare them to a person. So very large, very heavy boats. So to start off, let me stop sharing this picture. To start off, I want to see what you guys remember from the things you looked over. So my first question is, with those super large, heavy boats, how do they stay afloat in water? When you think of a heavy object, you think of them sinking. Whole object to driving a boat is not to let it sink. So how do they keep floating in the water?
Buoyancy.
Buoyancy. Definitely. Tell me more. What about buoyancy?
Well, the
Right.
buoyancy force is what allows it to stay above the water, so it has to be less dense in water.
Yes, exactly. Yep, so you got them both in there. So the density of the boat and then the buoyancy, making sure the buoyancy force is greater than the force of gravity, pulling it down. So there are 2 situations that you can get into with boating that are going to affect the buoyancy, affect the density, cause your boat to sink. Actually, there's probably more, but 2 that I want to talk about. So can anyone guess what one of those situations would be? What might happen to make a boat sink?
A hole.
A hole, definitely. We don't like to talk about boats hitting things and poking holes in the bottom, but it happens. So water floods into the boat. So flooding is definitely one of the things that it can affect your buoyancy. What might be another one? This one is more planned for, but still can go wrong.
Maybe the mass of the entire thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of boats put on a lot of cargo or load a lot of people. And so obviously if you put too much of that on, you're going to have an issue. So those are the 2 things that I wanted to talk about. Both can definitely affect the buoyancy, affect the ability to float. So the first one, I know in one of the links, one of the YouTube videos that you guys watched, it talked about the cargo load lines on a boat. Those are lines on the side of the boat that mark kind of the depth in the water that the boat can sink to and not completely sink. So when you're loading cargo, not only do you have to keep things balanced, but you have to keep things under a certain weight and keep those lines above the water. So I have another picture I want to try to share real quick of some of those load lines. Let me see if I can get this one. All right, can everyone see that picture?
Yes.
Good, good. Okay, so this is showing the load lines on a boat, and you can see there's one drastic line where the red and the black meet, that's called the plimsoll line. And that's the kind of the main line, but you also see a lot of different notches here. And those are actually all load limit lines. So my next question would be, what would these different load lines have to do with? All of them are important. What might affect that load limit of these boats? I'll give you a hint because it's a little trickier. It has to do with the density of the water that this boat is in.
Is it like maybe the different type of water, like salt water or fresh water?
Yes, absolutely. So if you look at the top line, the top two lines actually are over on the left side. Those are both for fresh water. So you've got your tropical freshwater, then your normal freshwater. Then when you go to the right side, the dashes that go to the right side, those are going to be for seawater. And you have tropical water, you have summer water, you have winter water, and then you have winter North America water. So these cargo boats that go into a lot of different locations are going to have different load limit lines. And it all has to do with the density of the water they're going into. So, so I wanted to ask you guys, do you guys know which water is denser, freshwater or saltwater?
Saltwater, right?
Yes. Yes, very good. So my boats are only in seawater, but some boats that go into freshwater and seawater are going to have those different marks. But you're exactly right. The seawater is definitely more dense than the freshwater because it has more in it. So if you remember, density is the amount of stuff in a liquid, the amount of particles. And so seawater has a lot more minerals. It has a lot more salt. It's going to be denser. And so the load line that we're watching when we're loading people is our salt water. It's the winter line, so it's the cold water. But both the temperature and the amount of salt or amount of particles in that water changes the density. So that's why we have those different loading lines. So that's definitely one thing you want to pay attention to. If you load past those lines, I've got another picture here of what you don't want to ever see. And that would be a boat that has been loaded too heavily. This one actually, disclaimer, this happened in a hurricane. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but we're gonna pretend that they overloaded this boat because this is exactly what would happen. Definitely would affect the buoyancy of the boat. At a certain point, that gravity force would have outweighed the buoyancy and caused the boat to sink. So loading cargo is definitely one of the things that you have to be careful with if you don't want your boat to sink, which we don't. The other thing we talked about was flooding, and this is a little more relevant to where I work. We don't load cargo, we're passenger boats, and even when we're at full capacity, we're still way lighter than our boats could handle. So that's not really an issue for us, but flooding definitely is. We have huge tidal fluctuations in Alaska. We get up to 18 feet of a tidal difference every day. So when you're going out in the morning, if you're at a high tide, you could go right over rocks and they don't bother your boat, they don't hit. Then on the way back in, if you go over the exact same spot, you might hit a rock. So this is a little more what the captains in my area have to pay attention to. And we drill all the time just in case a flooding event ever happens. So say a boat was out there and it hit a rock, poked a hole in the bottom. The issue is you're going to have water flooding into the different compartments, and that's going to be adding mass to the boat. And again, if that boat gets too heavy because of the flooding water, the force of the gravity is going to be greater than the force of the buoyancy force, and it's going to cause that boat to sink, which again, we don't want. So this is one of the things that when you're looking at the design of the boat, one of the things to pay attention to is the watertight compartments. So luckily, we've learned a lot from boat disasters, and the boats that are out on the water today, the portion of the boat that's under the water is compartmentalized into watertight compartments. The idea is if you got a small hole in your boat, it could fill and flood one compartment completely, but once it filled that compartment, it couldn't get out because it's watertight. And so more or less you're slowing, or you're at least putting a barrier into your boat to stop the flooding water. The boats that we work on have what's called a 2-compartment rule. And that means that the design of our boat and the density of our boat can continue to operate if it has 2 compartments flooded. However, if it floods 3 or more, that's when your boat is going to sink. And that's when we would start abandoning that boat and getting in the more buoyant life rafts, which it happens, unfortunately. I actually have pictures. I've had one, in all my time working boats, I've had one issue where a boat did hit a rock and it was starting to flood. I was not on that boat. However, I was on the boat that went out to pick up the passengers because it was full of passengers at the time. So this was our one unfortunate boat accident in my time working in Alaska. In this picture, you can see the underneath side of the boat. This is the propeller that hit the rock, pulled the whole propeller shaft back. So this is the outside of the boat, which wasn't the issue. The inside was the issue. So this is down in the engine room. This is the transmission of the boat, which you can see got shifted when that propeller hit the rock. It pulled the shaft, which is connected to the transmission here, back about 8 inches, which pulled this apart. And then under these floorboards, you can see this pipe coming up. That's our saltwater intake for the boat. The engines are cooled by the salt water coming in from the outside. However, when this shift happened, it pushed that pipe back and cracked the pipe bad enough that it was definitely flooding the boat. They quickly called another boat to come out and grab their passengers. And they were actually able to stop this flow of water. We have what's called a damage control kit. They were able to stop the flooding before it flooded even one compartment, which luckily on our boats, we could have flooded this entire compartment and another compartment, and still that buoyant force would have still kept us afloat. But that's the one issue I've had on boats in my time in Alaska. So that's flooding. Flooding, the weight of the water is going to affect the buoyancy of the boat. And then that cargo loading, that's the other thing that can affect the buoyancy of the boat. So that's pretty much all the science stuff I have for you. Mr. Sharp, how was that? Cover everything you wanted? Okay, good. So as you can see, it's kind of a risky thing driving boats. Oh, thank you. It's definitely, you take risks every day you go out on a boat. And a lot of people, when they kind of start to understand the risk, they'll ask me why I want to captain boats. And so to explain that fully, I also have to share some pictures because there's a lot of good things about my job. So first I want to show you a couple pictures of the benefits of my job. So not always scary things like sinking boats, but first off, I want to show you, this is the town I live in Alaska. This is the town of Seward, Alaska. So I'm a big fan of Pratt, Kansas, but I don't know, Seward's a little more picturesque. This is taken from the top of a mountain nearby. You can see the small boat harbor. You can see we had a cruise ship in that day. This is the town I live at, and we're back right on Resurrection Bay. And so this is the Gulf of Alaska coming in to the town of Seward. And this is the attraction that brings most of our people out on our boats. Our boats are tour boats that not only go out for the wildlife, but also go out for the glaciers. So we have 3 tidewater glaciers that we can get right to the face of on our big tour boats. This one is a glacier called Izell Glacier. It's a mile across at the face, and at its highest point right at the face, it's about 400 feet high. So huge glacier. It's the biggest glacier in our area. Beautiful area. There's me with a piece of the glacier. We like to scoop up these pieces because they look very small in the water, but they are not. They are very large pieces of ice. So that's me with a piece of the glacier ice. And then the wildlife, of course, is one of the benefits. We get to go out, and in our area of Alaska, we see mainly 2 types of whales. These are the humpback whales. This is a feeding behavior called bubble net feeding. And it's one of the rare feeding behaviors to see. It's where all of the whales in the area work cooperatively to ball together the bait fish that they're eating and they'll ball them up together and get a bigger bite with a lot less energy used. So those are the humpback whales. And then my favorite whale is the killer whale. Yes, those ones are my favorite. The orca. We have 3 different types of orca in the area. These were the residents, they're the fish eaters, but we also have transients, which are the mammal eaters, and we have offshore orca as well, and those are the orca that will often take down shark. They've even been documented eating great white sharks, so definitely one of the top predators we see. I did not take this picture. I stole this one from a guest, but that one's like the best picture I can use to show my area of Alaska. A breaching killer whale right in front of, this is Bear Glacier. This is actually 3 glaciers that have come together. You can see those strips in the middle. So this is one of my favorite pictures of the area. And then a couple other things that we'll see out on our tour. These are the sea lions. These are the stellar sea lions. And lastly is another one of my favorite animals, and that is the sea otters. So not everything about my job is, you know, physics and trying to calculate if my boat's gonna stay afloat. Definitely a lot of added benefits. So that's my job. That's pretty much what I got.
All right, I'm muted.
There we go.
So, that was good, right? Courtesy clap.
Thank you.
Up there. So I want you all to ask questions. She hit really the big points that I wanted her to get through to you all. Was that there's things to do outside of Pratt, which most of you already knew, but there's some really exciting world things to do out there. So she hit that right on. And that most jobs, even if they contain some science, don't contain just one science. So you're problem solving everything all the time, and you have to do it all at once. So you want to pick up bits and pieces. So even though you're in physics, you're going to do a job that only contains a little bit of physics and a lot of just you. So she hit on that. So ask her about her and what she does and how she does it.
Do you have a question, Aaron, or do you want me to go first? Okay. Okay. So, what made you want to become a captain?
Oh, that's a great question. So growing up in Pratt, obviously I did not spend a lot of time around oceans, but I did love marine biology. In fact, when I left Pratt High, I wanted to major in marine biology, but I got really nervous being from Kansas and getting a marine biology degree. I didn't know if I would ever live by the oceans or even if that was exactly what I wanted to do. So I went and got a general biology degree, and I was first working as a naturalist in Wichita, just stayed close to home, working at a nature center there, talking about animals, talking about the ecosystems and stuff. And I decided to go to Alaska on vacation one year and went out on one of these boats that I work on now. I thought that was really cool, like pretty much my same job except on a boat in the middle of the ocean. So I started looking into it a little more and found out that they were looking for biology instructors to work on their boats so that you had kind of more of a background in the biological field. And so I just randomly applied for the job. And in the interview, they asked me if I had ever worked on boats before. Told them no, that I was from Kansas and I had been on one boat as a passenger. That was my whole boating experience. But they're a really good company to get in with because you don't have to have any experience. So I just moved up there kind of on a whim and prayed to God that I didn't get seasick. Luckily I didn't, but started working on boats as a deckhand and really fell in love with it pretty quickly right off the bat. So that's when I decided to work up to getting my captain's license. And it took me 3 years to get my first license, and then I just upgraded this last winter to the bigger license that I have now.
Do you have like? Oh, go ahead.
Okay, no, you go. Okay, yeah, I already have one. You go.
Do you have like a daily routine, or does it kind of vary?
Yes. So boating's a routine is good when it comes to boating. So we have almost like a checklist to do in the morning. I work on the earliest tour, so I get to my boat at 4:45 in the morning, which is insane. And if I didn't love my job, I would not go into a job at 4:45 in the morning. But we go in that early. The crew starts getting like the outsides of the boat clean, preparing like food and stuff for our passengers. But the captains go through a checklist to make sure that the boats are safe for operation. So we go through kind of basic stuff like you would in a car. Before going on a long road trip, we check the oil, we check to make sure we have enough fuel for the day, check like all of the systems that get the boat functioning. And so then we start the boat, get it warming up. And that's when we start going through the different safety operations. We'll do drills a lot of the time. Being in the cold Alaskan water, safety is our biggest concern. If passengers were to go over the side and like a man overboard, it's super serious in the cold water up there. If you go into the water in Alaska, where I work, which isn't even the coldest water in Alaska, but you have about 3 to 5 minutes before you go hypothermic. So that's when we start doing drills in the morning. We check to make sure that all of our safety equipment is on board, number one, and operational. We go through and test things like bilge pumps, which pump water out. Say we were in a flooding situation, we have pumps on board that will pump the water back overboard to keep us from sinking. And so we test stuff like that. Then we load passengers and take them out, and we are usually out for about 6 hours and then come back in and clean up the boat and do it all over the next day.
That's all I got.
Any other questions?
When you were talking about you upgraded your license.
Mm-hmm.
So like before, could you like only operate smaller boats, now you can operate, or how does that work?
Yeah, so the licenses work in two different ways. One is based on the size of the boat, and one is based on the water type that you're working on.
Mm-hmm.
So my license upgrade was not to drive bigger boats, but it was to drive them further out. So the license I had was called an inland license, and you can drive in the inland waters, so any lakes or the Great Lakes, or in my area in Alaska, I could drive in Resurrection Bay because it was protected, so I could do our bay tours. But with that license, I couldn't have driven all the way out to the glaciers. So I upgraded to what's called a near coastal license, and I can go much further away from the coast now. I can go all the way out. I can drive anywhere that our boats go in Alaska. I also work my winter season down in Hawaii, and in Hawaii, there are no inland waters. Obviously, there's only water around the islands. And so I couldn't drive down there, and now with this license, I can.
Is there anything more you can upgrade to, or are you at the top?
Yes. If I wanted to, which I'm not sure I do yet, I could upgrade. There's actually a few more steps that I could go up. I could go up in tonnage, so I could drive bigger boats like tugboats would be another classification. Larger boats like cruise ships. The highest license you can get takes a lot of work to get, but it's called an unlimited license. And that means you can step on any boat in the world and drive it. So it doesn't matter the size, it doesn't matter the water type. I don't think I'll ever get an unlimited license. The license I have right now is pretty much the license I need to do anything that I want to right now, but I definitely could upgrade even more. Any other questions?
What other skills should they be concentrating on to do jobs like yours? Like they're in school, they're in physics, they're go-getters, they participate in activities. What do you think prepares them where they're at right now to go to somewhere where you're like?
That's a great question. So the main thing we look at when we're hiring is work ethic, honestly. And you guys have an advantage. I don't know if you know this, but a lot of people in places outside of the Midwest, they like hiring people from the Midwest because we have a good work ethic, which I didn't know this until I moved to Alaska, but I've heard it, and my brother who also worked in Alaska heard it. So a good work ethic is the number one thing you want to make sure you have. Make sure you're like a self-starter. You don't need to be told exactly what to do. You can kind of think for yourself, which I can tell all of you guys have that down. So yeah, other than that, just kind of like Mr. Sharp said, all of the science subjects, when you get a job, it's not just one thing that you need to remember or have learned. It's kind of all of it. So I would just say kind of try out different subjects, find what you like. When I was in college, I really didn't know what I wanted to do in the workforce or what job I wanted. And so I just kind of tried out a lot of different classes and found what I liked, and then got the degree and kept going and found out other things I liked it and ended up as a boat captain. But yeah, just kind of try out a lot of things and definitely go into something you like. I hear a lot of people that I went to school with complaining about their job and, you know, saying these things about how, you know, they have to work so they can do things that they like. And you can like your job. It is definitely possible. I love my job. I have never woke up and thought, oh, I don't want to go out on a boat today, or, oh, I don't want to go out and look at whales and glaciers. You know, every day I'm excited about what's going to happen out there. So definitely find something that you enjoy, whatever that is.
What is like the procedure for like parking the boat?
Ooh, docking the boat. That is the trickiest part of my job. Pretty much anyone can drive a boat in open water where you're not going to hit anything. It's not that difficult, but docking the boat is definitely the hardest part. So you come back in through a channel. All harbors have a channel on the outside that keeps out any wave action to keep the boats protected. And you have to come in at a very low speed. The biggest challenge about driving a boat that's different than like driving a car or something is you can't ever just stop. You're always moving. Either you're moving or the water around you is moving or the wind is moving you. So you just kind of have to take it slow and be ready for anything. A lot of times there'll be wind pushing you one direction or the other. And so you have to use your engines to kind of counteract the action of the wind. We don't get a lot of currents in our harbors, but that's one thing that you can run into is currents pushing you in a certain direction. And so pretty much the procedure is slowly come in. We have what is called a twin screw. We drive twin screw boats, which means it has two engines on both sides of the boat. So you can use one engine a little more powerful or the other engine a little more powerful to help turn the boat, help maneuver the boat. And then we're lucky enough to have bow thrusters, which pushes the water one way or the other from the bow. So you can move the bow a little direction. In case there's wind or something, you can move the bow without moving the entire boat. But docking is definitely the hardest thing about my boat or driving the boats. It's still the thing that makes me nervous. I don't really get nervous for flooding, sinking boats, but I do get nervous about hitting the boats that I'm docking next to.
What kind of training did you have to go through to advance to captain of any kind?
Ooh, that's a good question too. So when I first started working, I was what is called a deckhand, and you're pretty much the bottom of the line there. You are in charge of tying the boats. So the boats are big enough that you have to have multiple people tying the lines when you get close to the dock. They have to grab the lines and tie them up to the cleats on the boat so that the boat stays against the dock. And so when I first started working, that's all I did, you know, tied the lines. And then through just the years working there, I've gotten more responsibilities. So the next step up is called a senior deckhand, and you're kind of like the manager of the boats. You're in charge of the other deckhands. You're kind of the in-between for the deckhands and the captains. So you go and check the engines throughout the trip. When the captain's driving, he can't step away from the wheel. So you go down and just kind of make sure everything's running smoothly. If there is any kind of an issue, say an engine stops working or God forbid you hit something, you're the one who goes down and you deal with that. So that's kind of the next step up, and you train with the captain to learn those responsibilities. And then another thing that comes with being a senior deckhand is you are kind of the relief driver. So if the captain needs to take a break on our longer tours, or if he needs to go to the bathroom or something like that, you take over driving. And so that's mainly driving in open water. But the longer you work with certain captains, they'll have you drive to, say, the fuel dock, or drive to other places in the harbor where we have to like load life rafts and stuff like that. And so just through the years, I've gotten experience driving on the boats kind of little by little, and that's where I've got all my experience. And then when you actually get the captain's license to drive the tours full time, they train you for half a season where you're driving, but there's another captain up there with you. So if you get into a situation that you can't handle, the more experienced captain will step in. So they're really good about training you little by little, and not just saying, all right, drive the boat.
Other questions?
I think I'm all out.
How do we
What's your-
come see you?
What was that?
What's the process of us booking a tour?
Oh, we're online. Come up to Alaska. I'll get any of you guys on the boats. I got the captain perks now. So you come up and I'll take you out on a boat.
Okay.
I want to hear about one of your experiences, like maybe your favorite or one of the most scary or something.
Okay. Let's see. I'll go with scariest first. So not very often, but several times throughout a season, we'll get really bad storms moving in off the Gulf of Alaska. And I told you guys that I work on the earliest tour. And so a lot of days, if it's like a marginal weather day, we're kind of the guinea pigs. They send us out and we call back on the radio, let them know what's going on out there. Because there's only so much you can tell by, watching the weather or being in town. So sometimes we'll go out there and our route takes us across the Gulf of Alaska and then back into a protected bay. And so if weather is moving in, we might make it around what's called the Cape. It's a point of land that you have to go around to get back into the protected bay. And then while we're back there, we're protected from the weather. And so we might not know exactly what's going on. And if those storms are building, we sometimes can run into issues on the way out. And so one time, luckily I was not captain at this point, I was just a deckhand, but we went out and it was kind of sketchy getting around the Cape. It was probably 10-foot waves, which 10 to 12-foot waves is kind of the, like most will go out into. After that, the boats will make it out, but the people are not liking it. People are getting sick, that kind of stuff. So we got around and we had a pretty good group of passengers on. They were not getting sick or anything. So we made it around the Cape and it was, again, like 10-foot seas. There was a little bit of wind on it too. I'd say maybe 20-mile-per-hour wind. So it's like, that's like kind of the peak of what we would go out into. But we went around the Cape and we got back into the protected bay and it was beautiful back there. The outside islands kept all of the wave activity out. So it seemed really nice back there. And then we started hearing, as we were leaving the glacier, reports of the other later boats coming out and questioning our reports, saying that it was way worse than we had called it. And so we come out of the protected bay and it was insane. It was the worst weather I've ever seen from a boat. The waves had gotten up to 18 feet, which is way worse than we would ever go out into. The wind was like up to 40 miles an hour, which makes everything harder. And then the like worst part about it was the tide was changing too. So we were going from a high tide to a low tide. And when that water changes, it will rush into the protected bay. And all of that makes the waves even bigger. And so I would say the waves we were going through were like 20, 22-foot waves right there at the Cape. And it was like a roller coaster. I've never, and I never want to be in weather like that again. And thankfully, I was not the captain. I was with our most experienced captain, and we got through it fine, but our passengers were definitely freaked out. I mean, it was like the point where like the boat would go up to a point where you couldn't see the water anymore. Like looking ahead, you couldn't see water anymore. You were like that high up on the wave, and then we were just slammed down. And that was definitely the scariest situation I've ever been in. And not a situation I would want to be in as a captain. But luckily, our company is really good. If you don't feel like your boat should go out that day and you cancel, you can switch to a bay tour. stay in the protected water. And I will definitely be doing that the first few years that I work as a captain, because I do not ever want to get in waves like those. I guess I can tell you my favorite thing too, and on not a scary note. So my favorite days out on the boats are any days that we get like an extraordinary wildlife sighting. Like I told you, the killer whales are definitely my favorite. So they're my favorite for a couple reasons. One is they're really interactive with boats. They'll come over, swim right under, they'll like look up at you. Sometimes they'll like stick their head up and look at you outside of the water. They're just a really intelligent, interactive animal. So anytime we see that, I love that. Anytime they come super close to the boat. But then sometimes we see the transient killer whales in like active pursuit of another mammal. And so that might be a seal, a sea lion, or a type of porpoise. And I think my favorite events are when we get to see the killer whales chasing down the porpoise, so like very closely related to dolphin, mainly because they have the same burst speeds, the orca and the porpoise. And so you'll watch them just kind of ripping around the water, chasing each other. And the killer whales to take down, to kill the porpoise, they headbutt them. So they jump out of the water and try to land on the porpoise. And it's sad because they're killing another cute animal out there. But at the same time, it's like watching the most intense like car race or like thriller movie you've ever seen, watching them try to capture that porpoise. And sometimes they get it and sometimes the porpoise wins. So either way, it's super cool to watch them try to take down anything else out there. That's definitely like everyone's favorite moment, is to see the transient killers taking down another animal. As sad as that is.
No, that's a pretty good story. Hey, we're gonna sign off to you right now, Emma. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for being here. Like I said, there's no way I could replicate this. I've got to have these students come back in 10 years to tell their story now.
Yes.
Right? You set the model for them. You set the mark high. So thank you for coming, being with us, Emma. And
thanks, guys.
Bye, favorite students. Yeah. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll get together again next week. We're clapping for you. Yes. Lots of claps.
Thank you. See you guys.
Bye.